Hello, dear friends, and welcome back to the next part of The Coming of Civilization, a history book that details the eras, civilization eras throughout history, ancient history. It's a rather ancient book itself, as you can see from the discoloured spine. It's 50 years old, but still provides a lovely insight into the peoples that maybe time forgot, or perhaps we don't know much about. So we finished with the Assyrians last time. And we are now going to focus on the Persians. Quite a famous race. Quite a famous civilization. So we're the first race to acknowledge one invisible god, and the first to spread the use of money as currency. And under their rule, the Middle East enjoyed peace, prosperity, and religious tolerance. So most civilizations come to maturity after a long period of cultural and military development. Persia entered world history with dramatic suddenness about 547 BC, and in that year, Cyrus II, king of the small Iranian state of Anshan, reached the climax of his career. After 13 years of war, he united the several Aryan kingdoms of Media and Persia under his leadership, so that his domains extended from Asia Minor and the Black Sea to the Gulf of Oman. And here is the empire suddenly bursting into history to swallow up territories of all the previous civilizations west of China, and no other empire equalled its size until Han China and Rome appeared. It fell suddenly to Alexander the Great in 334 to 331 BC. So the Achaemenid dynasty that Cyrus founded was to last only 2 centuries, but it came to rule the largest empire that the world had known up until that time. The old territories of the Sumerians, Egyptians, Indus Valley peoples, Babylonians, Hittites, Phoenicians, and Assyrians, they were all absorbed into the Persian Empire by about 400 BC. Parts of Ethiopia, the Balkans, Central Asia, it also came under Persian rule, and at its height the Persian Empire was as big as present-day Europe without Russia. The Persians originated very little. Mostly they built upon the achievements of their predecessors and improved them, but the Persian peace that they imposed brought about a new stability and prosperity. So all the Persian kings were ruthless in extending their conquests. They weren't cruel by comparison with their neighbours and predecessors. Toleration rather than intimidation was the keynote of their imperial policy, and the Achaemenid kings sought to assimilate conquered peoples into the empire on favourable terms. Persian rule was also less rigid than Assyrian, so less objectionable. Babylon submitted to Cyrus without a fight, and many Babylonians preferred his rule to that of Nabonidus, the last Chaldean king. Instead of destroying Babylon as Sennacherib had done, Cyrus honoured it by making the city one of his several capitals. Always get people on side, don't push them away. The empire was organised into satrapies, provinces, by Darius I, and the third king of Persia. Each satrapy had its satrap governor, but Darius I, mindful perhaps of Cyrus's career, was suspicious of satraps who might grow too powerful, and alongside each satrap was a general, and also a secretary of state. So the power was divided between them. The 3 officials had to report directly to the king, and his personal inspectors visited them regularly, accompanied by a troop of soldiers. The Persians took over and extended the Assyrian road system. The royal road, built by Darius, ran 2,500 kilometers from Sardis to Susa, and was used by traders as well as soldiers. Mounted couriers sped the king's orders along the royal road, delivering them to the remotest borders in 2 weeks. So except for Persia itself, which was privileged, all satrapies paid taxes to the central government, and in previous empires taxes and tribute had been paid in kind, but now money, a much more convenient form of exchange, was coming into use. Learning from Croesus, the last king of Lydia, which was defeated and annexed by Cyrus, Darius I issued a gold coin, the daric. Soon this passed as currency even outside the empire. Apart from monetary taxes, each satrapy continued to send goods in kind as a tribute to Persia, according to its ability and Persia's need. Payment in kind from all the 20 to 30 These satrapies included corn, sheep, mules, horses, hunting dogs, gold dust, children, and frankincense and myrrh. Children. It's rather conspicuous. So apart from the payments to the Persian court, the satrap himself exacted tribute. It said that Darius I, having been assured that the taxes he proposed to levy could be borne, half them, he knew the satraps would finally double the levy to give themselves as much as the king received. However, Persia's taxes were not oppressive. Darius received every year in cash alone the equivalent of over 3 million gold sovereigns, but this was not excessive considering the enormous size of his empire. So the Persian kings were not bigoted, and in the satrapies they conquered peoples were free to worship their own deities. The religion of Persia was distinctly different from those of old empires it had annexed. 3 religions were practiced among the Medes and Persians. These were the king's religion based on the one god, Ahura Mazda, the god of gods, and the people's religion centered on the god Mithras and the goddess Anahita. There was also the cult of the Magi. The 3 religions of Persia became, to one extent, intermixed. So from Ahura Mazda, the creator of heaven and earth, the Persian king supposedly drew their authority. The king had no images, the god had no images, but was worshipped in the form of a symbol, a bearded, upright male figure centrally placed in an open wing. The religion of Ahura Mazda was founded by Zoroaster, who may have lived about 660 to 583 BC, or possibly much earlier. The followers of Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrians, were among the first peoples to acknowledge only one god. He was symbolized by a bearded man on an open wing. Mithras, later identified with the sun, had connections with the Aryan gods of India, but Mithras was also identified as an assistant to Ahura Mazda in his fight against evil. Anahita was the Persian goddess of fertility. The Magi were probably a Median tribe who provided the priests and scholars of the empire. The word magic comes from their cult. They were also astrologers who drew inspiration from the Chaldeans. Their chief function was to carry out a certain ritual, the nature of which was unknown. Probably magic. Here's a magnificent silver dish, showing a man, possibly a king, killing lions. It's a fine example of Sasanian art. A gold miniature model here and a masterpiece of Persian metalworking art, the kind of chariot used in Persia shortly before the Macedonian conquest. Here are some archers shown on glazed brick, forming the backbone of the Persian armies that created the world's largest empire. And a gold drinking cup of the 400 BCs found at Ecbatana, one of the Persian capitals. Decorative but highly formal design, typical of ancient Persian art. So the Achaemenians had several capitals. Susa was the main one, Pasargad another, Ecbatana was the summer capital, and Babylon the winter capital. Each succeeding king tried to outdo his predecessors in architectural splendour. About 520 BC, Darius I began the construction of a new capital, Parsai, known today by its Greek name, Persepolis, and when it was completed some 150 years later, it became one of the most impressive monuments of all time. The capital was also a shrine, the main centre for the New Year festival, celebrated in spring. And in art, Persians borrowed freely from the peoples they conquered. Darius I in this court probably spoke Old Persian, an Indo-European language. Public business is quite likely to be conducted in Aramaic because the Persians used local peoples for their civil servants. It's probably these people who developed cuneiform, the 36 characters that form the basic script of Persian writing. And a few ideograms were sometimes used alongside the script. Avesta, the language of the Zoroastrian holy books, was closely allied to Old Persian. The Achaemenian kings took a keen interest in forestry, agricultural, and hydro-engineering. Once felled, trees were systematically replanted. Fruit trees from the west of the Euphrates River were transplanted to the Eastern Empire, and the Persian pistachios were planted in Syria. The Persians planted rice in Mesopotamia and sesame in Egypt, and experimented with viniculture. The land was worked by serfs and slaves employed on large estates. Main crops included wheat, barley, and olives. And the diet of rich and poor alike included meat, fish, bread, oil, wine, and honey. Large estates provided for most of their own needs in clothing, furniture, and other everyday items. And under Persian government, living standards rose in most parts of the empire. The The Persians kept the old waterways and could repair and constructed new ones. So Cyrus early on faced a hostile coalition of Babylonia, Egypt, Sparta and Lydia, and with lightning speed he defeated and annexed Lydia before its allies could send aid. Of course, Sparta and the Persian War being a focal point of the film 300. He prized Palestine and part of Syria away from Babylonia and took Babylon itself in 539 BC. Cyrus annexed all Babylonia to the borders of Egypt. The Parthians, Bactrians and Sagai also submitted to him. Cyrus's son, Cambyses, speedily subdued and annexed Egypt in 525 BC, and several revolts then broke out against him, and Gaumata, a magi from Media, usurped the throne. Cambyses died while hurrying back from Egypt, probably by suicide, and a relative of his then killed Gaumata, crushed the rebellion and installed himself as Darius I. So to protect the northern borders of his empire, Darius attacked the Scythian lands from the east of the Caspian Sea to the Balkans west of the Black Sea. In the course of this attack, he annexed Thrace and Macedonia, and among the conquered Greeks of Asia Minor were the Ionians of the Aegean coastal strip. Ionia revolted in 499 BC, aided by Athens, and this brought about a full-scale Persian attack on Greece, but the Greeks finally defeated the Persians at Marathon in 490 BC. Xerxes I assembled an army of 180,000 men. Using Phoenician vessels, he built a double line of boats to bridge the Hellespont, and in 480 BC his warriors advanced over it to defeat the Greeks at Thermopylae. Then Xerxes pushed on to Athens, which he burned, but in the same year the Greeks defeated his fleet at Salamis. Fearful of being trapped without supplies, the main Persian force returned home, and in 479 BC the Greeks defeated the remnant of the Persian force. So despite its victories, Greece remained weak because it was disunited, often at war with itself, and the Persians kept control of Asia Minor and Cyprus by cleverly exploiting Greek divisions. However, Persia was in decline. It recovered quickly but briefly under Artaxerxes III, who retook Egypt, which had broken away. But a new power was rising in Greece. The Macedonians hammered most of Greece into a single state and invaded Asia Minor in 334 BC. In 333 BC, Alexander the Great of Macedon defeated Darius III at the Battle of Issus. Following further defeat in 331 BC, the Persian Empire collapsed and disappeared as suddenly as it had begun. Here are some surviving columns of Persepolis rising skyward behind the grand staircase. Love to see that in person. Stunning, isn't it? The intricacy of those carvings. We now have here the Hebrews, the fabulous King Solomon, David and Goliath, and the prophet Moses. They're all part of the Hebrew religious tradition that has spread its influence throughout the world, and it's given us both Christianity and Islam. So here is the map of the Promised Land of the Jews, which from about 926 BC was divided into Israel in the north and Judea in the south. Distances were small, Jerusalem to Nazareth being about 100 kilometers, and Jerusalem to Mount Sinai about 450 kilometers. Here the Torah, read by being wound and unwound from rollers as required, contains the 5 books of the law traditionally given by Moses by God on Mount Sinai. The Torah is read by Christians as the first part of the Old Testament. So most of our knowledge of the Hebrews or Jews before Roman times comes from the Old Jewish Bible, known by Christians as the Old Testament. But Hebrews also appear in Egyptian records about 1200 BC. They fled from captivity in Egypt to settle in the less fertile parts of Egypt and of Canaan. And then they were developing their worship of one supreme invisible God, Yahweh, and despite their neighbours for worshipping the idols of several gods. The Jews were weak militarily. They had little political influence. Their land was usually dominated by great powers such as Egypt, Babylon and Assyria, but their religion of Judaism, backed by its dynamic literature, became highly influential, and from it stemmed two even more powerful religions, Christianity and Islam. So the Hebrews did not easily accept the idea of one invisible God. So when their leader Moses went up to Mount Sinai to receive the 10 Commandments from God, the people rebelled. They demanded that Aaron, Moses' brother, should make them gods such as other tribes had. Yielding, he molded them a golden calf to worship, but later the Hebrews entered into covenant with with Yahweh. By this they became his chosen people, whom he would protect and help, and in return the Hebrews promised not to follow other gods. Once in Canaan, the Hebrews were at first led by judges, men and women picked for their wisdom, but the authority of the judges often depended upon whether they had the support of prophets, men believed to communicate the will of God. The Hebrews often called their high priests and kings messiahs, and later the prophets foretold that an ideal king would come to lead Israel. They said he would be a direct descendant of David, a Hebrew hero king, and this future ideal king became known as the Messiah. The Hebrew Bible is probably written around 1200 to 150 BC, one of the greatest literary works of all time. Stories are made and known throughout the world. It's not one book, but a collection of them. In the first 5, the Torah, law, laid down the pattern of life to be followed by the Hebrews. And after AD 200, another set of writings, the Talmud, was compiled as a guide to the laws and religious teachings. The Bible was compiled mainly in Hebrew, which used a script derived from Aramaic. Spoken Hebrew almost died out by 100 BC, after which most Hebrews properly spoke Aramaic. The tents of the Israelites referred to in the early books of the Bible probably resembled those of the present-day Bedouin people. And the Dead Sea Scrolls, discovered in 1947, which are the oldest known manuscripts of the Bible, include all of the parts of the books of the Hebrew Bible except Esther. A Bedouin boy found them preserved in a cave. So traditionally the patriarchs, fathers of the Hebrews, were Abraham, his son Isaac, and grandson Jacob, renamed Israel. They may have lived about 1900 BC. Abraham is said to have left Mesopotamia for Canaan. Suddenly the Israelites, descendants of Israel, settled in Egypt. About 1300 BC they were reduced in status to slaves, and according to the Bible, Moses led them out of Egypt in search of the promised land of Canaan, and they journeyed 40 years through the desert. Moses' successor Joshua led the Hebrews into Canaan probably about 1200 BC. They were forced to settle in the hills because enemies, notably the Philistines, occupied the more fertile coastal plain. Other tribes also warred with the Israelites, including the Edomites, Moabites, and Ammonites. The 12 tribes of Israel were ruled separately by judges, and by 1020 BC they united and chose Saul for their king, against the advice of their prophets. He was followed by David and his son Solomon. About 926 BC the tribes quarrelled, and 10 tribes broke away to form a smaller kingdom of Israel in the north, while the other 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, set up the kingdom of Judea in the south. War followed between them, but stronger powers decided their destinies. Both Israel and Judea became tributary states of Assyria, and King Ahaz of Judea gained Assyrian aid from Tiglath-Pileser III against invasion by Israel and Syria. In 721 BC, the Assyrians finally destroyed Israel and dispersed its people. So after Babylonia had destroyed Assyria and annexed Judea in 587 BC, and although Judea survived, its leading citizens were taken as captives to Babylon. And after Cyrus, the Persian conquered Babylon in 539 BC, he allowed the Judea community to return home. For a time, Judea came under the control of Ezra, a priest, and of Nehemiah, who acted as Persian governor. When Persia collapsed, Alexander the Great took Judea in 334 BC, and he as his successors allowed the Judeans to practice their religion unhindered. When King Antiochus Epiphanes tried to reverse this policy in 168 BC, the Judeans successfully rebelled. United under Judas Maccabeus, they managed to defeat their Syrian overlord and won independence for nearly 100 years. In 63 BC, the Romans took the Judean capital of Jerusalem, and about 97 years later, Jesus of Nazareth was arrested for teaching ideas that conflicted with Jewish law and custom. Some Jews thought that he was the Messiah, or anointed one, but the Jewish leaders rejected this and forced Pilate, the Roman officer governing Judea, to have him crucified. The Judeans tried a final revolt against Rome in AD 66, but in AD 70 the Romans finally crushed them. Most Jews then left Judea, which disappeared from the map. Here are the houses of poor Hebrews in Israel and Judea. Single-roomed, box-like structures made of clay. And in Inside, the dark room was lit only by small high windows, contrasted with the blazing sunlight outside. The family slept on a raised section of the floor, on a flat roof that served as a second room, reached by an outside staircase. Each house had its own courtyard, within which goats and donkeys might be kept by families that could afford them. It's more than I have. We now have the early Chinese. The ancient Chinese were a great nation of traders who exported silk and spices, bronze and jade to the far corners of the known world. With their iron tools they built the Great Wall of China, the only man-made edifice to be seen from the moon. Here we have the early Chinese Empire. The Han China Empire expanded to encompass an empire bigger than most any other dynasty for the next 1500 years. Here's a cute-looking bronze wine vessel shaped like an owl. So it was between the time of Hammurabi of Babylon and the fall of Crete that Chinese civilization began to emerge about 1600 BC. Its centre was due east of Persia, beyond the mountain barriers of Central Asia in the valley of the Huanghe Yellow River, where settlers cultivated the fertile soil and kept cattle in shape. From the 1500 BCs to about 1028 BC, this settlement was ruled by the Shang dynasty, followed by the Zhou dynasty, the Qin dynasty, and the Han dynasty. So the life-giving Huanghe was the Chinese people's source of food, but in times of flood, the river became their most dangerous enemy. Flood control was one of the two basic tasks of every emperor. The other great task was to protect the northern frontier of the civilization against invasion by the nomadic Mongol tribes. Under the Zhou dynasty, the country was split into several vassal kingdoms, each of which built a defensive wall against the barbarians. When the state of Qin hammered the other kingdoms into one unified country, it linked all the walls into the Great Wall of China. Inside this wall, the Chinese, sometimes united, sometimes divided, developed a single culture that has existed for an unbroken period over 3,500 years. Incredibly enduring. So China's first important dynasty, the Shang, had a feudal structure with the court and nobles ruling over peasants and slaves. In the country, the slaves worked the land, while in large towns such as Yinzhou, Anyang, the last Shang capital, they were employed in workshops. Shang dynasty cities and villages were walled and their buildings were of wood, with large rectangular halls raised on earthen platforms. By 10,000 BC, the total Shang population probably exceeded 4 million, occupying an area about the size of modern Spain or the ancient Assyrian Empire. The Shang rulers needed more labour, carried out slave-raiding expeditions on the fringes of their empire. A nomadic people called the Zhou eventually retaliated. They fought with deadly crossbows and a new efficient chariot and finally caused the downfall of the Shang. The vassal kings of the Zhou then took over most of the Huanghe and Yangtze-Kiang basins. Zhou rulers set up a string of village communes known as the Qingdian system, whereby each family in the commune was allotted a piece of land, but was bound to cooperate with the others in farming the whole area as efficiently as possible. Each Zhou commune was largely self-sufficient, quite highly developed. The land was tilled with animal-drawn ploughs and manure was worked into the ground. Every so often the fields were left fallow to rest them, and two-pronged wooden hoes were used to plant rice, wheat and millet. Crops were harvested with sickles of stone, and shell bone was also used to make weapons, tools and writing materials. Animal farming included cattle, pigs, sheep, dogs and chicken, and wild animals were also hunted for their meat, sometimes from horseback. To the Zhou, horses were a prized possession, used for pulling royal carts and war chariots. Silk was produced in southern China from prehistoric times, and the silk industry prospered, particularly under the Shang and Zhou dynasties, who used advanced weaving techniques. Silk was worn by the rich. The less well-off wore clothing of skins, furs, flax, or leather. Iron ploughs and tools came into general use by 700 BC, and these and advanced techniques improved the productivity of farming, increased its scale. As capital and expenditure grew, the Qingdian system died out, and land came under the control of nobles and rich peasants, and disputes between states became so frequent that 475 to 221 BC is called the Warring States period. The demand for iron in agriculture brought a mining boom. Smelting works Chinese employed hundreds of workers, making, among other things, spades. And these iron spades had a direct influence on the expansion of trade. They enabled more canals to be dug. The rising state of Qin cut a 150-kilometre canal, which transformed 250,000 hectares of wasteland into farmland, and besides forming an important trade route. Another waterway linked the Yangtze Kiang and other rivers into an integrated transport system, along which many new cities developed. By 400 BC, perhaps 25 million Jew people occupied an area twice as large as the old Shang territory. Prosperity reached a high peak under Emperor Wu of the Han dynasty. While fighting the Xiongnu, he discovered that a secret and profitable trade was being carried along the Silk Route between China and southwestern Asia. Realizing its potential, he brought the trade under governmental control, promising protection for the caravans against the Xiongnu Mongols and other robbers. Chinese bronzes, jades, lacquerware, ceramics, and above all silks travelled westward to Damascus, Rome, Spain, even distant Britain. Eastwards into China went rugs and carpets, frankincense, camphor, coral, plants, birds, horses, and other animals. Here are human skull bones, which provided writing material for some of the earliest known Chinese characters, of which we have here, like matchstick form, later developed into present-day characters. Both forms are shown for a tree and a goat. Tree, goat. And rice has been an important crop of China since the earliest known times, especially in the south. It wasn't, however, until the main food after Han times. In Chu China, people ate beef and mutton. In Qin and Han times, people ate reduced quantities of meat and switched to pork and dog meat because pigs and dogs required less land. Wheat was then replaced as the main crop by rice in southern China in AD 300 to 600. In northern China, the rich ate rice and the poor ate wheat. I absolutely love rice. I could eat it as a main staple all the time. Here we have the Great Wall of China, built as a defence against the Mongols, which absorbed the forced labour of 30% of China's manpower in Qin dynasty times, over 2,200 years ago. Quite an endeavour that endures to this day, of course, though. The Emperor Wu benefited personally from the prosperity of his people. He laid out the imperial park of the Han emperors in Chang'an, vast ornamental gardens bounded by a wall over 160 kilometres long, where Indian rhinoceri roamed with other exotic animals in a setting of groves, lakes and springs. Sounds lovely. The twin religions of China are Taoism and Confucianism, the teachings of Confucius. Both originated in the 500 BCs and can be considered as philosophies rather than religions. They also played an important part in forming the Chinese character. Confucianism teaches loyalty to the family, ancestor worship, and obedience to the laws of society. It puts the accent on ceremonies, order, and the proper way of doing things. Taoism, summed up in the Tao teaching, the way and its power, ridicules Confucianist ceremonies and rules of behaviour, says that men should always work in harmony with nature, never against it. Taoism incorporates many deities which have been worshipped from earliest times and are organised like the earthly royal court. Below the Jade Emperor, the chief god, were the moon goddess, the rain, wind and thunder gods, the gods of wealth, happiness, walls and ditches, the kitchen and so on. The god of examinations was probably inspired by the Confucians, who imposed on China a strict examination system for those who wanted to become mandarins, senior civil servants. Developments in arts and language in ancient China were related to the demands of religion and trade. Bronze urns, often in animal shapes, were used for making sacrifices, preparing food and exporting, as were lacquerware, ceramics and jade, which was regarded as a product of heaven. Chinese pictographic language was developed to record early works of literature. Poetry was set to music, the works of Confucianist tradition and rival philosophies. Mythology, contact with the barbarians, introduced war songs, dances, and Mongol drama into China. Consistent with the Chinese character, science was regarded of little value until it could be directly related to practical purposes, such as hydroengineering, agriculture, metallurgy, the calendar, and weights and measures, which were especially important in trade and taxation. Chinese also studied mathematics, astronomy and engineering, and exchanged philosophical and scientific ideas with Persia. Here's the wrestlers, a bronze of late Jew times showing two identical men poised in opposite directions with their hands joined. And here is Confucius, the Chinese teacher of 2,500 years ago, seen surrounded by his pupils in this silk painting. So the Shang dynasty was established in the 1500 BCs when a tribal chief named Tang overthrew Jie, the last ruler of the legendary Hsia industry. About 1028 BC, King Wu of the Zhou divided the last Shang emperor Muye near his capital and set up the Western Zhou dynasty. Many small vassal kingdoms came into being, owing allegiance to the Zhou emperors. In 771 BC, the Western Zhou were overwhelmed by the Yanyu and Nanjing tribes. The defeated Zhou Emperor Ping moved his capital eastwards to Luoyang and began the Eastern Han Empire in 770 BC. 500 years of border and internal wars followed. In 256 BC, the last Zhou Emperor abdicated power to the king of Qin. Qin systematically crushed each neighbour, Han, Wei, Chu, Qi, Zhao and Yan, and annexed them. In 221 BC, when Rome was preparing for its second war against Carthage, the king of Qin took the title of Shi Huangdi, the first emperor, and in his new role pressed millions of unwilling peasants into forced labour for ambitious building projects. During the reign of the second emperor, 900 army conscripts found themselves unable to reach their frontier position on time because of floods. To arrive late would mean certain death, so they killed their commander and became outlaws. Their revolt sparked off a revolution, and soon the Qin capital of Shenyang fell to the peasant armies led by Liu Bang. After defeating his rivals in 202 BC, Liu Bang became eminent emperor, first ruler of the Han dynasty. Once established, he managed to buy off a threatened attack by 300,000 Xingnu horsemen, but under the rule of Wu, they returned again to attack the Han capital, Chang'an, and Wu drove them back in 3 bloody wars. Wang Mang, a regent, usurped the throne in AD 8 and introduced reforms. Civil war followed, and in AD 25, Liu Xiu, a deposed Han prince, set up the Eastern Han dynasty at Luoyang. Western Han territory, including the Silk Route, was lost to the Xingnu, and in AD 184, Zhang Jiao led the rebellion of 1 million yellow turban peasants. The imperial army crushed the yellow turbans and swept away the last Han ruler. As a result of this revolt, the Han Empire disintegrated in 220 BC. There's a bronze flying horse of the Eastern Han dynasty, symbolizing horses imported from Fergana and Sogdiana. The gallop was shown more accurately than in any European paintings before AD 1700. Wow. And this pottery model of a Han house was entombed with a dead man to provide him with the house in the next world. It's very elaborate, isn't it? With that, I think we shall put a pin in it. So I look forward to having you join me next time for more civilizations throughout history. But until then,